by time. Verily, man is in loss, except those who believe and do good works, and enjoin one another to truth and patience. Amen. My name is Sidra, and I am the researcher and writer behind the Rivers of Hope Toolkit. And I want to mention that I did not draw any of the illustrations in this toolkit or design it. I wish I was that talented, but I am not. The toolkit was designed by a wonderful woman named Aza Abaro. She sends her best and her love. She's out of town, but she's the person who's behind the design of the toolkit. And if you ever want to work with her, her website is right on the back, azaabaro.com. So today we have a full lineup of speakers, poetry performances, and a lot of information about this toolkit. We're going to go through it together so all of you are aware of what's in it and how to use it and how to benefit from it. But before we get started, I just want to thank all of the donors that helped make this event and the printing of the toolkits possible. I want to thank Nasiha Muslim Youth Helpline. Is anyone from Nasiha here? You want to stand up and wave? Or wave? Yeah. Thank you so much. Nasiha donated so that the toolkits could be printed. I would also like to thank the Canadian Council of Muslim Women for their donation. Anyone here from CCMW? Stand up and wave. I'm embarrassing everyone. Sorry. I would also like to thank the International Development and Relief Foundation for their donation. Anyone here from there? Farheen, thank you so much. And finally, the National Council of Canadian Muslims for their donation. Anyone from NCCM here? Thank you so much. It would not be possible without your generosity and believing in this toolkit, so thank you. I also want to thank all the volunteers at Sign-In, including my father, who's there. And I would like to thank the Regent Park Catering Collective, who are the hands and work behind the food that we're having today. And for those of you who don't know, the Regent Park Catering Collective is a social enterprise in the Regent Park community, and it focuses on economic development for a lot of women in the community to put on this wonderful catering service. So support them whenever you can. To thank the Canadian Association of Muslim Women in Law for their endorsement of this event. So that is everyone who's behind this wonderful event. And I just want to take care of a couple housekeeping items. You've all probably seen that washrooms are right here on the side. Feel free to use the washroom whenever you need to. There's also someone from the community who's videotaping the event. Her name is Manal in the blue sweater there. If you don't want to be videotaped by her, she's going to be mostly focusing on the front. Just let her know and we'll make sure you're not on camera. Okay, so let's get started. Throughout this event, I'm going to be taking everyone through this toolkit so that you're aware of everything that's in it and how to use it best in your communities. Does everyone have a copy with them? Okay, great. So, has anyone ever heard the words, go back to where you came from? Very familiar phrase. So let's take that sentence apart. When we hear the words, go back to where you came from, it kind of has a lot of assumptions built into it. The person saying it assumes that this land belongs to them, that it always has and always will, and that they are the owners of this land. And it's really important when we're challenging Islamophobia to not always respond to, go back to where you came from with saying, well, I belong here, this land is mine too. It can be tempting to say that, but I really want to challenge everyone to push further and to think about who the original people were on this land and who still are here and struggling for justice for their community. That is the Indigenous communities of Toronto and of Canada, of Turtle Island. And when we're talking about Islamophobia all throughout the day, let's think about how we can build bridges with Indigenous communities in our fight against Islamophobia. And to help us learn and think about how to do that, we have an amazing guest speaker for you today. Our first guest speaker is Deanna Pache. At just 29 years old, Diana Pache is a political advocate and has been called the voice of the next generation. In her past role as executive for the Assembly of First Nations of the National Youth Council, she promoted and practiced her Indigenous languages, cultures, suicide prevention, education, empowerment, and the child welfare system. She represents Indigenous youth in Canada from Manitoba and Ontario regions and has acted as the spokesperson for the Council. She continues to build awareness and understanding of the circumstances of Indigenous youth and peoples of Canada locally, nationally, and internationally. She has spoken at the Assembly of First Nations Annual General Assembly in 2016 and the Special Chiefs Assembly in 2017, addressing the National Youth Calls to Action to Indigenous Suicides and actively engaging Indigenous youth and global citizens online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, so follow her. Pache is a role model for all youth across the country. She is a proud Dakota and Odawa with a solid grounding in tradition and has the ability to move seamlessly between First Nation communities and Canada's cities. Can everyone please give a very warm welcome to Diana Pache, our first speaker.
Good afternoon, Rivers of Hope, and everyone here today. Thank you for the organizers for putting together this very important event and discussions that we need to start having. As you know, thank you for the lovely introduction. My name is Diana Pache. I am Dakota from Dakota Teepee First Nation. That's just outside Manitoba, and also Odawa from Wakomakon Unceded Indian Territory, which is on Manitoba Island, just about 6 hours north from here. Hamitakiope, apete de chantea washtea chuzapia, takshapa jutawin, imakiopeya. My spirit name from the stars is Dakota people. We're from the star people, and my spirit name is she walks with her deer medicine. Imakiopeya, wopidatakash lamitakia, to all relations. So in translation, we always honor the people that we're coming to speak for, and we come here with open heart and we acknowledge our ancestors and our language. I want to begin by paying my respects to the original nations of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of New Credit, and Anishinaabe, and whose territory this building now stands on. I want to acknowledge the ancestors who have loved the land here, and through ceremony and conduct and prayer. And I want to acknowledge the free and original existence of our nations and peoples extending back to the beginning of time through oral history and oral traditions. And I want to acknowledge the missing, and most importantly, I want to acknowledge the missing and murdered Indigenous women of this territory. When it comes to the violence and Islamophobia and violence against women, and how it affects us all, it occurs to me when working on ending violence against women and Islamophobia without working on the paradigm change would be a great mistake. And we need a mental and behavior shift away from prevailing paradigms of domination and dehumanization. The symptoms which are everywhere on the planet, our earth, our mother, Unshi, in Dakota it's Unshi, we call her Mother Earth. So more than 5 centuries ago, various popes in Rome on behalf of Christendom unleashed a paradigm I'm talking about. And this was since been woven into the laws and policies of the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So what they do, it's like hidden in code of Christian empire, and it has worked on all of us for more than 5 centuries to delusionize of our original nations and peoples and cultures and religions. And so it's called the doctrine of discovery. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but what I like to call it is the doctrine of would you say it? The doctrine of it's almost like the domination, doctrine of denomination. And that's where we come here and sit today, and we're dealing with these problems, and we're talking about these issues, because this is what's embedded in our law and our land, and this is what has been put on into ceremony from the popes. And so when you have this doctrine of discovery in place, it is declared the right of Christian people to come to these lands, to discover the lands of the heathens and infidels, they called us, and to assume the right of domination. And so I believe this ties into the conversation we need to have and understand what that is. And when I speak to Indigenous youth, I explain to them that this is the very reason why you are deprived from your culture, your history, your language, and everything, and which is why you consider taking your own lives and suicide, because it's a national epidemic right now. And we are trying to get the Prime Minister to acknowledge it's an epidemic. And the thing is if they acknowledge it's an epidemic, what happens is that they have to open this, they have to take the key to the sacred treasury box, I call it, and equally fund that problem, which is why they don't want to call it an epidemic. And so the doctrine of discovery is responsible for mass genocide of more than 50 million indigenous people, and the importance of acknowledging that. And what genocide is genocide, racism is racism, and violence against women is violence against women, and any other religion and culture. And so I'll share a story for myself, Paché. It sounds very French, but it's not actually. It's Dakota, and the French settlers couldn't even pronounce the original name, which was Pazimunahapani, which means the people that walk across near the. It's a special tree, and then we walk when lightning is around that tree. So they took away our last name, and what it really meant is who we were as people, and we're like, okay, well, it's Paché. And so a bank teller asked me if my last name is Paché, and so I explained that same story that I explained to you. And then she's like, oh yeah, that's what they do to a lot of immigrants. I'm like, where did I migrate from? Across the street? And so to me, that is like, it's a sign that we need to talk and educate one another, who we are, what these laws mean. And when I talk to young people, indigenous people in remote communities where there's not even a road to get to, I explain to them what the Indian Act is, what is the doctrine of discovery, what is the reason why you're on a First Nation. And I help them understand that. I'm like, this is the very reason why some of your parents can't tell them they love you, because of these systematic racism things that are put in place against our people. And I hold them accountable to knowing that and making that shift into that behavioral change. And so in moving forward, those are the kind of conversations I think we can work together and creating allyship amongst each other, because it's very similarities that are happening as domination. And so when I speak to people that are trying to make a shift in their programming and developing stuff, I tell them you have to understand what is basically stopping us. When you have things like the doctrine of discovery within law, you're basically hitting your head over and over and over again, and the problem's not really going to get solved, because we've got to talk about the key issues. And the same with indigenous people. I tell them language is very important in terms of even using an English word when you work with indigenous people. Like for me, I cannot stand the R word. And personally, the R word is truth and reconciliation. I ask my leaders, who even allowed that word, reconciliation? It's like, that's not right. So I did further research, and my story in telling you this is that I felt something right here. And that's your soul and your, speaking to you, that when you feel this here, it's you questioning what's right and wrong, and that's your signal to speak, and you're going to feel it right here. And that's when you have to talk. And so when I felt that, I questioned our national leaders, our elders, and everyone, where did this word come from? Because to me, it doesn't make sense. Basically, reconciliation to me is another form of genocide. And so that's what I want to leave here today, is I have to be careful, and when you feel that, speak out. And so when I did my further research into what reconciliation really meant, under Stephen Newcomb's work, reconciliation means to bring back under the submission of church and the Vatican churches of Europe. Is to bring back under them. And so to understand that history and to gain that knowledge, and that's why I'm standing here today to share that with you, because it impacts us all. And so, in closing, it is time for action for all of us to work together. No excuses. And I ask you to keep woke, keep raw, and to keep it real. Thank you. And I would like to ask at this time if you have any questions, because usually I just walk off. So please feel free. Yes? You can hit me up on Twitter, Deanna Pache. Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Instagram. Well, mostly you can reach me on Twitter at Deanna Pache. That's DEA and then APASHE. I don't know if my Bible toolkit.
I can email everyone in here your contact on Twitter.
Okay.
And Facebook.
Right. Yes.
I know that you had mentioned that you work towards educating Indigenous youth of their history.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if you believe that that type of information should also be like embedded in the school curriculums.
Absolutely. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she every year to her new class, she brings me in to speak to her class, and the importance of like what I speak to you and what I speak to grade 6, grade 5, grade 4 is very different because you have to be careful what you're saying, and you don't want parents to get mad at you. So the amount of feedback I get from her classmates, it's like an eye-opener to them to be more aware.
Hi, Deanna. My name is Brittany. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to ask you a quick question. I had the honor and privilege to visit Little Buffalo earlier in the year, and that's up in the north part of Alberta, as you know. It was a reserve, and I had a chance to see sort of the state of that community. I know for me, as an individual who's sort of on the front lines all the time, there's a level of exhaustion at some point that we started to kind of feel when it comes to this type of work, because we're consistently trying to sort of hitting that roadblock, as you said. What is it that keeps you motivated to keep doing the work?
What I forgot to mention is Christian, Muslim, and our religions, indigenous religions, they're very beautiful things. They're very important to who we are. And unfortunately, during this time that the Doctrine of Discovery was put in place, it was the wrong people taking that religion and putting it into something of domination of other religions and cultures. And to me, like Islamophobia, just to bring up, it's basically a way where they can create fear, just like they've done to indigenous people, where they can exploit their lands and resources, our oil, our gas, our everything. And so I do have a terminology for what you're saying. It's to me, I went 4 years straight traveling all over to communities, to cities, to conferences, to ceremonies, and I literally had a colonial burnout because we're working with the government and we're repeating ourselves. And then I start feeling something here again. And I'm like, why is this happening the same time over and over? Nothing's happening, well, nothing's changing. And so then I did my research and I discovered all these things. And then we had things implemented like the United Declarations of Indigenous People. And again, I questioned our leaders. What does that mean when it's not into law? When there's things like Doctrine of Discoveries in place, it literally doesn't mean nothing. And so what I did when I felt this burnout, I went back to my culture, I went back to the land, through any kind of in terms of personal experience violence, because growing up in Winnipeg in high school, there's a lot of racism in Winnipeg. It was named Maclean's National Magazine one of the top racist cities in Canada, and believe me, I felt it. I felt it everywhere. I was scared to go on a bus, I was scared to go to work, I was scared just because of the fact that I was Indigenous. So I felt the same feelings, and to me, that's what helped me is to be grounded, is to go somewhere where the land connect with the land. And to me, that's always Manitoulin Island, because it's so gorgeous there, and it's just surrounded by all the river and stuff. And I would just sit there, and I just, have a conversation with myself. So that's how I was able to carry on with this work.
All right, so I'm just doing a live stream, and some of them are asking about your future projects and how they can support you.
So one of my future projects right now, when I've been sitting at these federal and provincial tables and the frustration you feel, currently right now I stepped down from the national tables, working with Cindy Blackstock and the child welfare system, I'm currently doing my master's in business administration and my chartered professional accountant designation, because the way I found my way to make an impact in communities is through numbers. Because I know numbers don't lie, people do. But I mean, it really, right? Because, and when I sit with the government and I said, okay, where's your statistics? Without statistics, you can't have a proper formula to equally fund our people. And so that's when I found the systematic racism was in our healthcare system. We're detrimentally funded in our child welfare system, healthcare system, every system there. And I found it by studying accounting and studying the funding formulas and really understanding what that is. So when I speak at these events and get invited to these tables, very important tables, I question, what's your statistics? Do you know how many First Nations need schools? Do you know how many people are short funded for healthcare? And these are like the top general people that they hire, and none of them knew the statistics. So federal, provincially, you're sitting in these positions and you don't even understand what our needs are, because without stats, you can't properly fund something. So to me, they just don't want to know. It's easier just not to know. And so I stepped down, and I'm personally doing this education. So when I do go back to the political tables, they cannot question my credentials, because that's what they do. Who is this girl? What are her credentials? Okay, well, I'm going to go back, get my credentials, I'll come back, I'll see you soon. But for now, that's my current projects, and I'm just getting invited out to speak. And then, I just moved to Toronto from Winnipeg in August of 2017, so I'm very happy to be here. And, I just, in my spare time, I come and speak, and I love doing this. So that's what I'm doing in my current projects.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Deanna. And I want to put a challenge out to everyone here from an organization that works with Muslim communities to build relationships with Indigenous communities and to see the similarities and take action on the common struggles that we have, to learn more about the doctrine of discovery and the history of this country where we're trying to find acceptance. And I also, what's coming to mind too is when I learned about the history of Indigenous people in this country, and just very specifically how spiritual practices were banned. Many ceremonies became illegal to take part in Canada. That became law. And so as Muslims, we're looking at things like the niqab ban, and we might feel like we're the only ones being targeted for our spiritual practices, but that's not the case. There's a long history of that kind of targeting and banning of spiritual practices that have happened in this country before. So it's important for us to know those connections. So, as you know, there are going to be many poetry performances today. And I really like what you said, Deanna, about listening in here to, you'll know what's right and what's wrong through listening inside. And for me, I feel like poetry can really get us in touch with our hearts. And I hope that everyone here today can feel that connection. And so when we leave here, we'll be able to pay attention to when, this isn't right. Maybe I should speak up. This doesn't feel right to me. So we have poems throughout the toolkit. And one of the poems in the toolkit is written by Naima Hassan. Naima, you're here? Okay, wonderful. I'm going to introduce Naima, who's going to be our first poetry performer for the event. Naima is an activist and and a poetic storyteller who uses her life experiences to reach out to many other women like herself through her poetry on social media. Naima has been interviewed by Vice Canada about her experiences revolving around Islamophobia and has participated in many research projects encouraging women empowerment amongst the Muslim community. Besides her community involvement, Naima coaches basketball to young Muslim women in a nonprofit organization known as MBA. And also with other members, she facilitates a Sisters Youth Mentorship Program at a local masjid. So can everyone please give a warm welcome to Naima Hassan.
Assalamualaikum everybody. Hello, how are you guys doing today? Thank you for having me, Sidra, and thank you guys all for coming out to such an amazing event. I was just telling my sister that whenever we talk about Islamophobia, it's always that like notion of like that or like people that thought of that it doesn't exist. But just on my way here, I was on the bus and I had a staring contest with a fellow bus member, and he was just literally looking me up and down, and I'm just looking at him like, can I help you on this fine Saturday morning? And then he whispered under his breath, ISIS. And for me, honestly, like, it's sad to say that I've become used to it, but then again, there are many other women in the world who probably like hear about it but never have experienced it, and it takes a huge toll on our mental health, and that no woman or nobody should ever be disrespected on the identity that they have chosen to believe in. So I really wanted to put that out there. And so thank you, Sidra, for this book, and let's all continue to raise awareness so that other young girls who are growing up as Muslims in this world feel like they belong in a city that embraces diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to read two poems. This one was first called Dear Media, to address their effect on like Islamophobia today. We are tired and exhausted of having the words terrorist tattooed on the very forehead we bow down with to pray. News headlines, Muslims attack again. The very word that leads goosebumps down my spine, because I know when I exit my home, there will be a few, if not hundreds, that will believe I'm a terrorist in disguise. The pain I feel for those that have lost their lives is disregarded while I have tears running down my eyes. Muslims attack again? How on earth can this be said? I'm not even allowed to kill a spider. Hindu or atheist, I'm told to honor and respect you. And even if you are rude to me, I still have to be nice, because this is what Islam and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught me to do. Your media headlines are the same reason why I put a hood over my head while I walk home frightened. Does this even make sense? I fear for my safety, because what is said on the news could be the same reason why my Muslim life is put to an end. Young girls who choose to cover their heads or ask serious questions in class of why their people would kill and make such a big mess, while news articles of ISIS bombings are thrown onto their desks. Confused and embarrassed as they themselves are trying to figure out why these so-called Muslims are out here trying to play pretend. This fear that you have embedded into the hearts of those that refuse to pick a book and read about me is because of you. I don't have an autobiography, but I promise you, bombs, killing, and terrorism isn't a part of my vocabulary. This misconception of Islam, these fabricated messages of my faith that are broadcasted in the vast media needs to one day come to an end. I want to be able to raise my daughter in a world where she won't be labeled as a threat, so that she could apply for jobs without thinking she won't have a chance, and that her hijab will be a systemic barrier that will internally cause her anxiety and distress. So dear media, how about you put some respect on my Muslim brothers and sisters' name? So that's the next poem that I have is a poem that I actually read to Madge right here. She was also a poetry workshop facilitator, and I thank you for like having spaces like that available, like Mel or reward you immensely, I mean. So this is called When I Was 7. I was 7. When I cried about the injustice, my body was caged in, a criminal with no records of criminalization, but criminalized for how I have arrived from the inside of my mother's womb, black and Muslim. Last name Muhammad, melanin so magical, yet doctors of 7 seconds, already prescribing my socially adjusted labels to nigger and terrorist. See, this realization magnified my unwanted blackness, darkened my spirituality. I was 7. When I learned that freedom in the land of the free meant obeying the laws created by the oppressors. I was 7. When I learned to spell struggle before I learned to pronounce freedom. Exhausted of swimming in a pool filled in hatred, I was 7. When my body would drown in the discriminatory laws adjusted by white supremacists. Exhausted of being a target targeted by racist and Islamophobic predators. I was 7. When I learned to protect my black Muslim identity with my poetic vocabulary, they were 7. And were taught the importance of singing their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. So that was 7. Thank you guys so much. You guys can find me on Instagram, Naeema Writes, Naeema, and then Writes. Have a good one, guys. Assalamualaikum.
If you open the toolkit, on the first page, there's another poem by her that opens the toolkit called Dear Sister. So you're all walking away with actually 2 of her poems in this toolkit today. So in between performances, I'm going to walk you through the toolkit. And I'm going to do this so that you can use it, and so that if anyone, if you want to give it to anyone, you can really refer them to exactly where they can find the information that they need. So I'm just going to give you background on how this toolkit came to be. A year and a half ago, I decided to do a research project for my master's at U of T. And because of all of the stories I was hearing about in the work that I do, in my friends' lives, and in my own life, I decided to do a research project on Islamophobic violence against Muslim women in the Greater Toronto Area. And I came up with the topic before the Quebec mosque massacre happened. And so I had to get approval through ethics. It's kind of a tedious process, and the project was approved. And I believe it was 2 summers ago that I put out the call out. I put a call out on social media and some posters in the community. I said, are you a Muslim woman who has been through Islamophobic violence? And I didn't know what to expect, because usually, who wants to participate in a university research study, right? I thought it would be hard to find participants. But what ended up happening was, I thought I was aiming for about 6 or 8 interviews. But what ended up happening in that summer is 21 Muslim women came forward and shared their stories with me. And my supervisor had to tell me, okay, you have to stop interviewing now, because other people were coming forward saying, I want to share my story too. But my supervisor said, you have to stop interviewing because you have to write your thesis. So I think that really shows how big the problem is, and how few spaces there are for people to tell their stories in a safe way. The thing about these interviews that I conducted is they were anonymous. I met the person in a safe place. I recorded the interview, but their names were all removed from the transcripts. And you'll see quotes throughout the toolkit. You'll see little quotes from different participants. There are names at the end of those quotes, but those aren't their real names. I changed their names so that their identities could remain protected. And so I interviewed these women, and it had a really powerful impact on me. To be honest, I thought I'd be mostly getting university students and activists who would want to come forward for this study, but that wasn't the case at all. And I'll talk to you about who the research participants were in terms of the demographics in a second. But I just want to take you through this toolkit so that you can actually use it, so it won't just gather dust somewhere. If you go to page 4, just this, flip that first page. What you have here as a tool for you are definitions about Islamophobia and statistics. Deanna mentioned the importance of statistics and how if we don't have those numbers, people say, well, what do you mean? Maybe it's not true. And so, has anyone here, show of hands, ever heard someone say to them, well, Islamophobia isn't real. It's not really even a form of racism. It's not real, yeah. So how frustrating is that? To be going through something and then be told that what you're going through isn't real. So what I have here, if anyone says that to you, are some definitions for you to hold on to of what is Islamophobia. And there are scholarly research articles cited that you can cite to say, okay, if you don't believe me, here's a research article that outlines how, on the top, Islamophobia is a form of racism. Racism is not just about skin color. It is about skin color, but it is not only about skin color. People can be racialized through the clothing that they wear, their last name, or what religious identity they're perceived to have. That can all be used to racialize someone, and the whole point of racism is to say you are other, you are less than, and I can now have power over you. That's the whole point of racism, and scholars have agreed that Islamophobia is a form of racism. So you have that reference for you here about what is Islamophobia. You can point people to this and say it is a form of racism. Another definition I have here for you is gendered Islamophobia. Have people heard of gendered Islamophobia? Okay, so gendered Islamophobia, it's a term used to describe the specific kind of Islamophobia that Muslim women face. Because we know there are stereotypes about Muslims as a whole, right? Naima's poem mentioned, that we're terrorists, for example. That's a stereotype that goes across Muslim women, Muslims as a whole. But Muslim women, we are lucky enough, sarcasm, to have our own stereotypes that are just directed at Muslim women. I don't need to tell you. Can anyone shout out what stereotypes are directed at Muslim women? That we are oppressed, weak, subservient. And this is really important because when I asked many research participants, why do you think that people are targeting you if someone's yelling at you in the street or attacking you in the street? They said, because they think Muslim women are weak, and that means we are easy targets. So it's really important to know what gendered Islamophobia is. The more we're stereotyping Muslim women as weak, the more it kind of, in a way, leads people to thinking that, oh, okay, I can get away with this. So that's a definition of gendered Islamophobia. And a reference to someone named Jasmine Zine. The references are all listed on the back of the toolkit. She's written a lot about gendered Islamophobia. So if you want to research more about that or point people to the research to prove it, that's all there for you. And then at the bottom I have anti-Black racism. Naima's poem beautifully illustrated and painfully illustrated how Black Muslim women are living with not just stereotypes around Islamophobia, but anti-Black racism as well. And so this, we'll hear from people on the panel discussion later about how this combination can make Muslim women, Black Muslim women, more vulnerable to Islamophobic violence. So you have all three of those definitions there for you. In case anyone says it's not real, this can help you if you want to engage in the argument. Sometimes we don't want to argue, but this is there for you. And then on the next page, we have statistics. Research shows that Muslim women are the primary targets of Islamophobic violence. So if there is a major story in the news where Muslims are being described the way Naima's poem was mentioning, that Muslims attack again, after those news stories hit, Muslim women are more likely to be victimized by hate crimes in the streets. And I just want to, before I talk about these statistics, has anyone heard that if there is a new study came out where they showed that if there's a mass shooter or someone who commits public violence who is non-Muslim, and if you compare that to someone who does the same thing who's identified as Muslim, the Muslim perpetrator gets, guess how much? 5 times the media coverage. 5 times the media coverage than if the perpetrator is non-Muslim. So basically, if John shoots a bunch of people, he gets a certain amount of media coverage. If a Muslim perpetrates a mass shooting, he will get 5 times the media coverage as John. So that contributes to a lot of what we go through. But I'm getting sidetracked. These are just some research studies from the UK, from the US, and from Canada that show that Muslim women are the primary targets of hate crimes, which is why this toolkit is specifically designed for Muslim women. I'm going to take you through 2 more pages and then we'll get to the next poem. If you flip over, you have a snapshot of who the research participants were who participated in this toolkit. Who were these women? And this is really important. The average age of the people that I interviewed was 39 years old. The youngest was 18, and the oldest was a 58-year-old woman. And that really hurt my heart, that a lot of the women who are being yelled at in the streets or undergoing Islamophobic violence, their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunties, right? And I mentioned already, 4 out of 21 of the participants I spoke to were mothers or grandmothers, or grandmothers. And that's important too, because these women, after going through Islamophobic violence in public, they go home and the people who hear about it often or see the effect on their mother are their children. Sometimes young children, and sometimes young children who are present when their mother is being harassed. And they have to go home and be explained to, well, why did that person yell at you like that, mommy? Right? So there's a ripple effect of these incidents. And I'm going to mention that a few more things. Race. 19 out of 21 of the women who came forward to speak to me were Black Muslim women. So that's almost half of the research participants, which again underlines that combination: anti-Black racism, Islamophobia. 18 out of 21 of the Muslim women I spoke to were wearing some kind of clothing, hijab or niqab, when the incident happened. So we know that visibly Muslim women are targeted, but also women who aren't visibly Muslim, we can't forget about them as well, because one woman talked about severe violence that she went through. It was actually a sexual assault. And the reason she was targeted was because of her last name. And her peers were mocking her last name, which is a Muslim last name, over and over, and that's when the incident happened. And then I'll mention income. 17 out of 21 of the participants identified as low income. And we need to think about what that means, you know, because we're often told, well, why don't you report it? Why don't you do that? Like, there are a lot of barriers to being able to take action on these things. And the majority of participants just honestly got support from their families, right? So that's a snapshot of the research participants. I mentioned the perpetrators at the end. I don't want them to be invisible because these women aren't doing this to themselves. I didn't ask in the interviews who were the perpetrators. Can you describe the person who did this to you? Because I didn't want to upset the people I was speaking to. But some of them told me just voluntarily that, you know, this is the kind of person who did it to me. And of the people who described the perpetrators, 24 of them were white men. And I really want to pay attention to the fact that these are men attacking women. You know, I feel like with Islamophobic violence, that gets lost. But think about it. This is a man attacking a woman, in most cases, in public. In any other case, that would be really unsettling. But somehow, in our minds, we think if it's Islamophobia, it's a different story. So we really need to reclaim this as this is a form of violence against women. And then finally, before the next poem, we'll just flip over to the next page. And this is upsetting. We'll get to the river, the hope part of the rivers of hope later. We're in the river now. What are the types of Islamophobic violence that the people I interviewed reported? So that's on page 9. And again, this is something to share with a colleague, or if you say, I want to put on a workshop on Islamophobia, they say, well, we don't have that problem in Toronto. Most of these were occurring in the Greater Toronto area. He yelled at the woman Islamophobic slurs and he tried to run her over with his car. The police were called in that case. 2 incidents of physical assault, someone attempting to punch someone in the street. 2 incidents of sexual assault, and it's important to name that, you know, I don't think that's ever been mentioned, that Islamophobia can include sexual assault against Muslim women that's motivated by Islamophobia. Another new bit of information for me was that in a couple of cases of the people I interviewed, the Islamophobia was coming from people they were dating. So in these cases, these women were dating non-Muslims, And the non-Muslim men, in this case, were abusive to them. They were being verbally abusive, and they would say Islamophobic things to them as well, and they were abusive relationships that they got out of. And then the one that I heard most was verbal assault. So this is being yelled at in the street, what we talked about earlier, go back to where you came from, sometimes far more threatening words than that. And then shunning. One woman in niqab talked about how she was in her language instruction class and no one would speak to her because she was wearing niqab. So she had, everybody was talking to each other, being friends, they were learning the language. You need to talk to people to learn the language, and no one would interact with her. And in her case, she ended up removing her niqab. And she told me if I could wear it again, I would. I love it. It's my heart, she called it. She said, it's my heart. But she chose to remove it because she felt like people were shunning her otherwise. They weren't speaking to her. They weren't being friendly with her. And then another incident that was told to me was a coordinated hate attack at an Islamophobia event. So this happened about a year ago. There was an anti-Islamophobia event, and about 6 people walked in and were yelling and disrupted the event, really terrified everyone. We have security here, don't worry, that's not gonna happen here, but just to put it out there, that this is the kind of fear that our communities are living in. And then of course online, we all know what happens online. So there were multiple incidents of Islamophobic harassment, threats online that were reported to me. And if you flip to the next page, there's some quotes from the participants here that you can look through at your own time if you want to hear about the stories through their own words. So that's kind of a snapshot of the research. I also asked participants about what they wanted to see happen in terms of how people can help with this issue, and I'll be sharing that with you later. But for now, that's we're going to switch back to poetry mode. Did anyone have any questions about the research before I move on? Yes. It's in English. It was conducted in English. Yeah, all of the interviews were conducted in English. And I should say, the whole research report itself, which is like about 150 pages, it'll be online in June. And I can email it to everyone so you can have that full report if you want. Okay, any other questions? All right. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next poet. And this poet is also in your toolkit. So you have 2 of her poems in your toolkit as well. Hanan Hazim is a wonderful poet, storyteller, and an avid scripturian. Am I saying that right? Okay, scripturian, living in Toronto. She has a Master of Arts degree in English Literature and Creative Writing from the University of Windsor. She is the current writer-in-residence and literary arts instructor at Workman Arts. Hanan's writing has appeared in a number of publications, including the Windsor Review, Generation Magazine, and the These Pills Don't Come in My Skin Tone anthology for BIPOC writers. Her writing has also won several awards, including the Alistair and Anita MacLeod Prize in Creative Writing and the Dr. Eugene McNamara Award for Poetry. When not writing, Hanan enjoys overanalyzing things, same here, photoblogging, and dancing with fairies in the woods, and drinking copious amounts of tea. Please welcome our next poet, Hanan.
So what I'm going to share with you is not a fictional piece of work. So this actually happened. And I just want to apologize because there are some swear words in here, but I felt compelled to document it the exact way that it happened. Part 1, Growing Up Muslim. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land, glorious and free. God keep our land, glorious and free. God keep our land, glorious and free. But which God, and whose land, whose freedom, and whose glory? When I was 6, my best friend, in concern for my heathen soul, said, Mommy told me that people who don't believe Jesus is our Lord and Savior will burn in hell forever. Forever. condemned to eternal damnation in between games of jump rope. Unless I worship the Canadian God, the Christian God, as if Allah is a different God, as if God isn't just one. Picture this, on a warm spring day in Ontario, a young Muslim mother walking her 10-year-old daughter and her 8-year-old son home from school, and then a white, middle-aged man attempting to run them over with his car. I want to kill you all, you fucking terrorists. True patriots love and all thy sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise. But nobody rose to help us. Nobody asked if we were okay. Nobody stood up to the real terrorists. Thank you. Part two is life as a hijabi, and I'm going to read a list, and these are transcribed from things that people have said to me over the years. Did your father force you to wear that thing? Does your husband make you wear it? Are you a Sharia law Muslim now? Who brainwashed you into this? Aren't you hot in that? Aren't you? Aren't you hot with all those clothes? Poor thing, you must be so hot. You'd look a lot hotter without it. Who dresses like this in Canada? Go back to your country. You have no right to be here. You're oppressed, 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 oppressed. You fucking terrorist. You fucking Muslim. You stupid Muslim. Fuck terrorist. I will kill you. Thank you.
And it's true. I think the other, another big impact or finding from the research is that Islamophobic violence can have a really significant impact on the women that it's targeted against. On page 13 in your toolkit, you'll see a page that talks about the impact of Islamophobic violence.
Go ahead.
And many women described something like a trauma response when they were telling me about what happened. So they said a man was yelling at me on the bus and I just froze, right? I just froze. Or they just ran away without being able to think. And I think it's very important that we never blame ourselves for how we react in the moment when something like that is happening. And other participants talked about having nightmares and flashbacks about the things that happened to them. So it is difficult to relive these experiences and to talk about them. Next up, we're going to have a discussion. And I really hope that everyone can interact with the wonderful panelists that we have. We're going to have a panel discussion with 3 incredible Muslim women who are experts on this issue. I'm going to ask them a couple questions and then open it up to you. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and ask them to please come to the stage after I've introduced you. So our first panelist is Hudan Mohammed. Hudan is a diaspora Somali Canadian with a focus on community action research, public policy, immigration, incarceration, anti-Black racism, and Islamophobia. She is a co-founder of the Canadian Association of Muslim Women in Law, and her article on racial profiling was included in the Ontario Human Rights Commission 2015 annual report. Her research paper on the intersection of anti-Black racism and Islamophobia was published by the Somali Studies Journal on September 2017. Huda, do you want to join us? The second panelist, she also has the best fashion sense, and I've known her for many years, and she's always had, I'm sorry, I don't want to embarrass you. I'm so sorry. Okay, have a seat. All right. All right. The next, our second panelist is Aima Warich, also known as Niqabe or Niqabe Chronicles on social media. Aima came with an entourage, and she studies at Ryerson University. She's an artist and graphic designer and freelances through Muslim Girl. She is recently the winner of the TEDx Teen Project 1324 and Adobe Dialogue for Change competition. Her art was selected as the top 5 out of 365 applicants. Her motto is, "Empowered women, empower women." And then our final panelist Farheen Khan. Farheen Khan is an activist, writer, and public speaker. She is currently the host of the Aziza Show on Iwaz.com. Farheen identifies as a survivor of gender-based Islamophobia after 9/11 and continues to raise awareness about the impact of Islamophobia on women and their safety. In 2015, Farheen ran to be a member of parliament and was the only hijab-wearing woman across Canada to make it through the 11-week election campaign. So please welcome Farheen. So I'm just going to ask each of you, ask the group some questions, and you can take turns answering. Keep it informal. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Okay. So my research into Islamophobia began out of just my activism as a young person. I don't think we knew or we had grasp of the language when it comes to Islamophobia, anti-black racism. We will just talk about in general. I remember those of us growing up back in the 90s that we knew what bigotry meant, we knew what racism meant, but we didn't have the language to empower us and to be able to articulate the issues that we were facing, specifically Islamophobia and the way that it intersects if you are black. And as a Somali in this city, in this province, the moment that we landed on this land, on the shore of Canada, we were criminalized. We were not even in the country 2 to 3 years before we were called everything under the name, whether it was the parliament, the liberal government, so-called liberal government that is somehow inclusive today, and the way that they went about criminalizing the Somali immigrant community, specifically Somali women, which were the majority with their children in this country. And so my activism came out of just survival. A lot of us, a lot of our parents will seek us, we seek out us as children. So we were the interpreter, we were the translator, we were the mentor. A lot of us, we were the first, we were like co-parenting with our parent. And if you have a parent, you know the way that because of their accent, and many of them are excluded, so sometimes the person is talking to you as opposed to talking to your mother. It's like, my mother is here, she can speak fluent English, you know? And so a lot of my activism was around my community, just working with my family, my larger community, mentoring young Somali kids in my neighborhood. And so that's really...
So for me, I had two experiences. I went to a lot of different schools, public school and private school. When I mean private school, I mean Islamic school. And I saw the way teachers would undermine my efforts and undermine my knowledge because of being a Nagabi versus how I was treated in Islamic school, where I would receive a lot of support and motivation to do what I was passionate about. But when I went to public school, the teachers didn't want to interact with me as much. They wouldn't choose me to answer questions, or when they did, they would question my knowledge and my resources, right? And if somebody else answered with the same question, they would get like applause, or the teacher would lead on with their answer. But for me, they wouldn't even ask for my name, right? So sometimes, even though I sat at the front, I always had my hand up. And actually, I don't know if this is like a scary thing, I still haven't grasped it, but one of my friends reminded me how one English teacher, she was also Muslim, and in Islamic school, since I always raise my hand up, she actually said, like, you raise your hand up so much, I'm going to cut it off, right? And I don't know how to, I completely forgot about that incident, I blocked that memory, but that happened in Islamic school. And then in grade 12, I had a really good English teacher, right? And we started off on the wrong foot. We didn't know how to interact with each other. He's a white man, I'm a Muslim woman, and we talked about a lot of different topics after class, right? And that's how we bonded. And he's been one of my main supporters, and he still is, right? And he said, you know what? Before, I thought Nagabi women just hated men, right? Or they just wanted to isolate themselves on purpose, and they didn't want anyone to interact with them. But he's like, after meeting you, and hearing what's happening in the news, and hearing what my family says, I actually had like a breakdown in one of my dinner tables, and because they were saying all these horrible things about Muslim women, and he's like, wait, I have a Muslim student who's nothing like this, and she's a Nagabi, and he stood up for me, even though I wasn't in that classroom, in that room, and wouldn't have known what happened. But he said, he started crying in class, saying, you know what, I only have to experience a bit of that, but I don't understand how people can treat you like that on a day-to-day basis. So for me, I found that through art, creativity, it's the best way to reflect the times we live in. So through that, I reflect Islamophobia and the many different variations that can come in. So yeah, that's basically how I started. And it was through the support of the sisters online and offline in my community who gave me opportunities to come speak, like Sidra, Muslim girl who from day to day would publish my work because they said we need to consult with someone who's a Nagabi woman, right? But we don't want to go and pressure a Nagabi woman, for example, a mother or grandmother who wouldn't want to speak to us because sometimes you don't want to engage in those arguments because it's too time consuming and you don't want to explain yourself. So since I'm in my youth and I have a lot of energy, I'm like, you know what, I'll do it.
For me, I think, growing up here, when I was younger, I grew up in a very faith-based family. My father was one of the founders of the first mosque in Mississauga, so we grew up in a very religious household. But even then, as a community back in the 70s and 80s, nobody really wore the hijab. We weren't necessarily visibly Muslim people at that time. We were doing our best to, I think, as our family, just trying to make ends meet and sort of integrate as best as possible. So for me, growing up, when I made that decision to start wearing hijab at age 10, and I decided to actually go to school with it on, being the only child in the class, in the school, let alone in the class, wearing it, my mother was actually very concerned because she was like, well, I appreciate that you want to do this, but what about the kind of bullying you're going to face? Like, what about your safety? And so those were the kinds of questions that came up very early on in my life. And as I went through school, there were all kinds of comments that were being made. When I went into part of my story is I had to start working at a very young age to support my family financially. So a lot of what I had to also deal with was not just the fact that I was a Muslim woman, but also that I had issues around education and things like that. So when I went into the workforce, it was even harder for me to actually get a job because by then I was wearing a hijab, I was wearing a full abaya, and so a lot of it had to do with actually speaking to people and really being able to challenge their misconceptions just by virtue of asking them for a job, right? There was a lot of times when people would speak to me very slowly or very loudly, making assumptions as if I don't understand the language, this type of thing. And then when I finally landed a job and then 9/11 happened, at that moment in time, I think that's where really, I would say, my activism began, because I was actually walking into a call center where, there were hundreds of people standing up and literally people were actually looking at this TV screen, and my director came to me and said, you know what, Farheen, I don't think this is a safe place for you. You need to go home. I'll take you home. I'll make sure you come back at a time when things are a bit calmer. And so that was really when, for me, I had to really start to evaluate whether or not I wanted to continue to be a visible Muslim woman and whether I was prepared to know that there was actually a physical risk of being visible at that moment in time. Over time, after making that decision, I identified as a survivor of gender-based violence. I experienced a sexual assault as a result of being a Muslim woman. And because of that, I actually came out very publicly in the media. I wrote a book about my experience. I shared it very openly because I wanted people to know that there's a direct impact when people use irresponsible language, whether they're elected or unelected officials. There's a direct impact on the safety of our women, and that's so key. So for the last 15 years, we've been talking about this, and just trying to bring it to the forefront. And so when I ran in 2015 and I had that opportunity, my honest motive wasn't necessarily just to become a member of parliament. To be honest, it was to be able to meet to knock on those 10,000 doors that, thank goodness, thank Allah that I was able to do that, had the energy to do that. But being able to meet 10,000 people at the doors and say, hi, my name is Farheen, I'm running to be your member of parliament, and being able to see those wheels spin in their minds, right? To be like, oh my God, she actually speaks English. Oh my God, she actually understands what she's talking about. She's not what I see on TV, right? That was the key for me. So being able to take my activism to a whole different level, that's why, I did the work that I did, and that's why I continue to do the work I do. Thank you.
I'm going to go a bit off script for the questions I sent you. That's okay. So there are Muslims and non-Muslims in the audience today. I'm just wondering if each of you have a wish for what would you like to see allies do in this moment for the Muslim community? What would you like to see allies become aware of, take action on? What would you like to see from them? And what advice would you have to the Muslim communities that are here as well? So there's 2 questions.
So what we would expect from allies and what we want the Muslim community to do, Sidra? The last question was?
What would you like to see allies doing in this moment? And then also any advice for the Muslims in the audience?
Okay. So to me, the only role or functions of an ally is not just to be there for you, to support you when they are next to you, but also when they're not there. And specifically, and as a Somali, as a Black Muslim, I'm always curious when a lot of friends or when we have discussions about what can an ally do? Well, you can exercise your privilege, specifically if you are white or white presenting, if you're not Black, and you are in spaces where other Muslims using anti-Black racism. Talk to your uncle, talk to your grandfather, talk to the people at your table in your life, and engage with them in issues that is perpetrating or reproducing oppressive language that has an impact in everyday life. It has an impact in the way that our policies are drafted. It has an impact in the way that as a Somali kid going to a non-Somali masjid, there shouldn't be a Somali masjid or an Indian masjid, but that is a reality for us as Muslims. And so talk to your ally, talk to your family members. That is what an ally does, that they engage in the act in which you are as a survivor, because all of us racialized women on this table, in this room, we are constantly battering issues that is exhausting and mentally draining. And so if you are not a Muslim, if you are not a Black person, or a Black Muslim for that matter, then try to engage in the campaign of educating yourself, but also educating your family member, your loved ones, and engaging with us in changing policies and fighting at a domestic, local level, and at a national level for that matter. So that's really what I see the usefulness of an ally, and that's how I understand an ally means to me personally, and what are you contributing to the community that are being racialized and marginalized and oppressed. And in the case, what we're talking about in Islamophobia. In terms of what Muslims do, I think Muslims have to have engage in the conversation of Islamophobia. I remember when the Black Panther movie came out, and a couple of Muslims said, oh, that little 1-minute scene was somehow Islamophobic. Nah, that's not Islamophobic, right? And when I wrote the article responding to the fact that Black Panther is not an Islamophobic movie, I was engaging in conversation with Muslims and saying that when we talk about the issues or the subject of Islamophobia, we are always engaging from a white supremacist point of view. We're talking to other white communities when we should actually have an interreligious and interracial dialogue among racialized communities. Because Islamophobia is not just coming from a white person. Obviously, within a predominant society in Canada, it would, because they're the majority. But Islamophobia also can come from a racialized subject, as your research also shows. And I think it's important as Muslims to engage with each other, but also to engage with racialized communities about what Islamophobia is, to engage and fight against anti-Black racism, and engage with Black communities who are not Muslim. You know, as a Somali, the largest Muslim Black community in this country is Somalis, right? And within the city of Toronto, it matters that we engage with other Black communities when we have a conversation about Islamophobia, the same way that we can have a conversation about anti-Black racism.
When it comes to male allyship, I have a lot of men tell me more about how I, as a Muslim woman, should change my behavior than them changing their own behavior. For example, oh, if you wear your hijab like this, or if you spoke like this, maybe you would get less attention from, those men who want to, abuse you or something like that. But I feel like men should hold their brothers accountable, right? That shouldn't be a duty for Muslim women. If you're a man, right, and you know a sister's going through something because another brother is harassing her, step in, right, use your privilege and tell him to take a step back, right? Hold him accountable. We had Islamic Awareness Week in my first year at Ryerson, and I presented the idea of men wearing hijabs to show solidarity for the Islamophobia visible Muslim woman face. They said, what, men have hijab? No, we're not going to wear that. It was a whole controversy. They brought another sister in, telling her to say something to me, right? Because I was posting a lot about anti-blackness, racism, homophobia, the sexism within our communities. And mostly all of the MSC members in Ryerson messaged me, DM'd me, telling me to chill and not bring these topics up on the community page. Okay, it was a community page. It wasn't even their own MSA public page. It was the community page. And I was bringing these issues up, and they're telling me to shut up, right? So if you're in this community space and you're having your male Muslim brothers and your sister Muslim brothers thinking that you're too progressive, right? I feel like that's when we take a step backwards, right? And that's when we undermine our strength within the community, because if the community isn't there for you, then you have to seek that somewhere else. And most of the times, you have to go through a sense of bashing your own religion, right? And bashing your Muslim identity to receive that support, right? Especially when it comes to sexual assault. A lot of women, Muslim women, won't come out because they know if they tell other feminists, if you consider yourself feminists, the first thing they're going to tell them is that, oh, if you were an atheist or if you're not Muslim, you know, maybe this would have happened to you, right? Like if your religion, because of your religion is the reason you got harassed, right? Because apparently Sharia promotes that kind of stuff. They don't really understand us, and when we go to them to ask for help, they want us to say something negative about our own community and use that as a headline for us to even receive the support that we need.
In terms of the questions of internalizing Islamophobia, that somehow you forget your Muslimness, what do you mean? Like, I would like to have an example, because I don't want to assume what the brother's question entails. What do you mean by that?
So basically, because you're facing a lot of hatred, you sort of internalize that. So you sort of, for instance, before you were comfortable wearing a skirt, now you don't consider that, right? And you start to fit in. So you're actually reflecting the hate on yourself.
Okay. So I think you mean the questions around the hijabing per se, right? And I think that that example could also be a form of male privilege question. And I say that because as a Muslim woman, especially a visible Muslim hijabi, going out every day, you are constantly arming yourself to prepare for society. You take the subway, you're arming yourself. Hopefully today no one is going to look at me, no one is going to say anything, no one is going to harass me. I know so many sisters who stopped wearing the hijab for their own safety. And if you know your deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows you the freedom to hide your faith in the face of aggression or harassment or unsafety. This literally is in the ayah of Surah Baqarah. So in that sense, I really don't critique people for what their intention in their heart of internalizing Islamophobia. Because Islamophobia is an act of violence. It's politically, psychologically, sociologically embedded in Western history. It's deeply rooted in colonization, imperialism, and the way in which that to be a Muslim woman, to be a woman of color, whether you are Muslim or not, you are never the subject, the agent of your own autonomy, of your own history or own humanity. You're always the object. That's what Islamophobia is deeply rooted on. That they don't look at you as a subject as a human being who's entitled to right and protection. They're looking at you as an object to abuse, to dismiss, and to oppress. That is what Islamophobia is deeply rooted on. So, to me, whatever somebody's Muslimness internalization, I'm not privy to other people's heart. I can only make a judgment about how someone behaves and the way that they live, and even that is between them and Allah. I just leave it at that, really. And in terms of the other question was about Muslim brothers.
Directly connected.
Yeah. And I think it's extremely important that Muslim men don't show up only when they are at the pulpit, when they are being the one who have the benefit of authority and they're going to be speaking in front of other people and they are the guests of honor. And I think a lot of times that's why a lot of Muslim men don't show up unless they are in place of power and they're going to speak on behalf of the organization, on behalf of someone else. And I think that is where the leadership, lack of leadership, that you don't need to be the leader to be present for Muslim issues, to be present in spaces that discuss Islamophobia and the way that in which that it impact Muslim women. Like a lot of Muslim men should be in this room today because they all have Muslim women in their life, whether it's their mother, their sisters, their partner, their daughters. I see a father with his daughters. So like it matters for you to be present if you're not directly benefiting from it from a patriarchal perspective. So.
topic of internalized Islamophobia, the way I see it is that I applied to most of like the community outreach part of my MSA, and I'm not salty, okay? I'm not saying this because I'm salty and I didn't get the position, but I'm saying it because most throughout the years, most of their female members are all hijabis or non-hijabis, not a single niqabi, right? And I felt like, you know what, I feel like I'm qualified to apply. And they told me that they love how active I am within the community and everything, but I don't really fit the image, right? So that's a form of internalized Islamophobia, of what is considered a modern Muslim, right? And the hijab, taking off the hijab or taking off the niqab, it's not an act of weakness, but an act of strength, because no matter what a woman does, especially a racialized Muslim woman or, you know, like, the different intersections that are part of that, it's an act of strength because you're going to be scrutinized by either members of the community, from the, you know, not with the Western side and the Muslim community. But you'll never hear them come out to support you when you come out about the struggles you face. Hence why there's not a lot of men in this room today.
I'm sure we could listen to our wonderful panel speak all evening, but in the interest of time, we'll close there. And I just want to have a small token of thanks for you, Emma, and Hudan as well. Thank you so much.
I've been writing love poems these days. In trenches of psychological wars, entrenched in a thirst for more, I've been writing in the silence of solitude to acknowledge you, love. As I try to uproot us just to see how grounded we are and measure our depth. You see, these love poems are more like notes to self. Reminders to remember you, love, in a world that seems to not want you to exist, because I've seen hearts fold like origami inwardly to seek you, trying to mold something out of fragility as if the fragile spirit of a human being isn't beautiful enough, and I tell them. I want to unfold your intricacies and read the poem written on that paper heart. And not the final draft. I want to read the rough. I want paper cuts on my hands from holding you. I want to bleed from your blood, my origami. I know it's hard to open up. So you stay hidden. So you stay hidden. So you stay hidden. I know it's hard to open up, so you stay hidden. But I want to remind you that these ribs are not a prison. Not bars for your heart to sit in while it breaks so softly it almost mimics Brazilians. Instead, I want you to break bones of these ribs we make cages out of, and I will cast you a poem until you heal. But when you do, don't ever forget how it felt to be broken, because that's as close to human as breathing is to respiration, that's as close to compassion as feeling is to innervation, because we've all felt the friction of heartache, that volatile feeling of the trembling spirit, the tectonic shifting of pain, the words trapped in our throats, swallowed back into the abyss of the unspoken. I wonder how we will ever grow. I wonder how we will ever grow if we can't purge those suppressed words, however potent with anguish. To look up and realize that we're all folding in a sea of lost notes to self. And if you've ever seen a fold, you'll know, because it looks something like a scribbled out poem, like moments of stolen life, victim to a fingertips release, like moments of empty ecstasy, victim to a fingertips release, like tears streaming down cheeks that have been slapped more than they've been kissed. And amidst all of this, there are nights we wander loveless and confused, mistaking fireworks for stars, a street light for the moon. But still we remain one piece, resisting folding into two. So don't tell me there's no hope when I can see hope in every resistance of a fold. Insight to the resilience of your soul, unfettered, my origami. I promise you things will get better as long as you continue to fold, unfold, and spread out to the world. I decided I'm going to do the second piece. This one is more, I guess, connected specifically to the theme of gender-based violence, violence against women, particularly Muslim women. There are themes of lateral violence in here, as well as physical and sexual violence, so I just want to issue that trigger warning for those of you who need it. We kept trying to win wars with hollow guns. We would shoot for the stars in the pouring rain. We would shoot for the stars in the pouring rain, only for our guns to fill up as if we could kill with water, only for our eyes to well up as if we could kill with a blink, as if there was someone standing there in front of us to be killed, as if the battlefield wasn't our own reflections and the gun our own hands, shooting at the heavens because no one taught us how to reach instead. Shooting at the heavens because no one taught us how to reach instead. So we went to war with ourselves. We went to war with ourselves, begging on the corner of sunset and sunrise, looking for change, but instead receiving more of the same, and these restless days of relentless searching, these harsh realities that nothing is for certain, yet nothing is always something if you understand its purpose. Lessons draped in conflict. They say you don't have to understand the battlefield, rather understand how to fight right where you are. And I said, instead of amassing weapons galore, I built a fireplace in my belly to keep warm. Even though I was told that's not how you win wars, I thought, no, it's how you warm a home. This body is not your political statement. It is a matrix and its mystery, an ocean and its depth, a home at its core. Women in my family have been kindling fires in their bellies for years, emitting the strength of their light in peace, while their men called it a disease. Women in my family have been kindling fires in their bellies for years. And like my foremothers, it seized my body, looking for home too. Wandering the war zones of my spine, looking for release. I write poetry with the embers set free. I take words and burn them alive until they beg for mercy to speak their truth. I document footsteps in their ashes. You see, the fire, the journey, is not the fire that is done burning, but the aftermath of learning. That you don't have to put the fire out when sparks fly and they tell you you are a hazard. You don't have to evacuate yourself like you don't matter. They said I wasn't supposed to build a fire. It's too passionate, too imaginative. You might burn too hard, might burn this place down, turn this place around on its head. Just lay your head on the ground like a good girl. Good girls fight with water. They are cool like the breeze. What's the meaning of all this heat? You might burn us into oblivion. You might burn too hard. And in a world where everything is burning, sits the human heart in yearning. Like a quiet grenade with a quivering pin that's twisting inside us, afraid of losing form. So afraid it might lose itself in its pretty little cage. Well, I am the blood from a bitten tongue that lets you know not to silence yourself, that lets you know that you will be okay in the heat of your flame. That quiver you feel means you're deeply alive, telling stories by your fireplace, so tell me your dangerous story. Tell me about that time it was winter in your heart and you made yourself fall just to change the seasons. I love how in that story your survival transforms into freedom. She said that we could try to make back the love that was stolen in our girlhood. That if only we could turn fire, we could make fire out of rose petals. If only we could make fire out of rose petals. If we could incinerate the flowers, the ones we used to pluck to decide whether he loved us or not before we realized that he didn't know how to love, if we could incinerate the pretty little flowers, then maybe they could no longer call us little girls and use our bodies like playgrounds. You see, playgrounds are war zones too sometimes, she said, like bedrooms, like flesh, like open heart surgery you perform on yourself, like going to war with yourself, for yourself, when no one else will fight for you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's for our children, because they're seeing this, they're witnessing it, they're going through it, and to try and kind of help them navigate that. So this is one of the pieces that I was hoping I would get to do if we have enough time for another one. So this one's called Please Report Suspicious or Unusual Behavior. Have you had the talk? Not the one about the birds and the bees, not the one about the seasons of change between girlhood and womanhood, not the one about how to make shah the right way, a little sweet, a little spicy, a little something from somewhere else, because that is the true mark of a lady. None of those talks. Not the talks with scripts perfected over generations, not the talks embedded with the sounds and the tastes and the sense of the places our women gathered to shape one another. None of those talks, but this talk. The talk in which my mother tongue finds itself misshapen into unfamiliar forms, forms of fear sculpted onto feverish prayers. This talk, the talk in which the vowels and the consonants of the language I associate only with love and laughter and playful cutting banter, find themselves marshaled into stringent forms, forms of fear sculpted onto feverish prayers. This talk, Hoyo, promise to always text when you leave home and get to your destination, even if it's broad daylight. Promise to always say your prayers of exit and return. Promise to always text when you leave your destination and return home, even if it's broad daylight. Promise to always say your prayers of exit and return. Promise to never stand at the edge of the subway platform. Never, ever, ever stand even close to the edge of the subway platform. Promise to never stand at the door of the streetcar or at the top of the stairs or sit beside an angry face. Promise to check the reflections of people behind you as you walk past building exteriors, even if it's broad daylight. Promise to always say your prayers, for no advice benefits without prayer. Promise to stop and give the beggar his due, even if it's in the dead of night. True safety is found in relieving another's needs. Promise to disregard hateful words. Life is too short for hating hate. Promise to never say sorry for the space to which your breath gives life. Promise to tread lightly on this earth, for the entire earth is the mosque of your beloved. Promise to stand firmly when in the right. Promise to yield to the gentlest treats. Promise to always be aware of the hearts around you, for all hearts are constantly turning according to the will of their Lord. And the one who hates today can surely love tomorrow. This talk, have you had this talk yet? How does a loving mother say to a child, you are dear to me, and what is meant to be will be, but we must have this strange talk, because my heart is full, and the wisdom of the old talks will not avail you here.
Believe her. Say, I believe you. Tell her it's not her fault. Don't say, well, why were you walking there? Why were you doing this? It's not her fault. Ask her, what do you need? Don't tell her what she needs. Ask her what she needs. Offer support. Connect her with resources and support her choices. Whatever she wants to do, follow her lead. She's the one who's been through it. She's the expert. Follow her lead. Here's what not to do. Don't question her and ask her to prove it. Don't blame her in any way. Don't tell her, oh, well, you should just stay home now, or change something about herself. Don't minimize it and tell her to get over it. And don't abandon her to just solve it all on her own. Be a support for her. Okay, so those are some do's and don'ts that you can share with people in your lives. And then finally, it talks about offering her support and connecting her to resources. On your back pages here are resources. So we have a support resource list here that folks can use. The first one is the Assaulted Women's Helpline. This is a confidential helpline for anyone who's been through any kind of assault. Any woman who's been through any kind of assault, they provide confidential counseling and can connect you to resources. So that's a phone number you can give. There's also a NISA helpline, which is peer-to-peer counseling available to Muslim women of all ages, and this is run by Muslim women. There's the Nasiha Muslim Youth Helpline for Muslim youth to call and get support, and they get a lot of phone calls about Muslim youth going through Islamophobia. There's the Barbara Schleifer Clinic for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence. And there's 2 websites listed here for sexual assault and domestic violence treatment centers. And then on the next page, you have your options for reporting listed here. Your poem, Rhoda, your poem mentioned a lot about the TTC. Has anyone installed the Safe TTC app? No one's really using it. It's a new app that they have where you can report things that happen on the TTC on your phone. It's called Save TTC. If you look at the hashtag This Is Where, you might have seen those posters around where they say this is where this happened. It's kind of awkward, but so they have an app that goes with that, and you can report incidents that happen on the TTC through there. So all those reporting options are on the back for you. And I didn't get to mention bystanders, but on page 18, it shows examples of what bystanders can do if they witness something happening. So you can intervene directly. Not everyone feels comfortable directly confronting a perpetrator, though. You can also distract. You can start talking to them about a different topic, or talking to the woman, just distracting and diffusing the situation. You can delegate. You can ask the bus driver, hey, can you get some more support here? Or you can delay. If you're too nervous to intervene in the moment, you can at least check in with her afterwards and say, is there anything you need? How can I support you? So that's a run through of all that information here for you to share with others. And I forgot to mention, I'm going to make a workshop based on this toolkit and put it up on a website. So if you ever want to run a workshop at your school and your community, all this information is going to be in a PowerPoint as well for you. Last but definitely not least, we have one final poetry performance by Amina. Yes. Thank you so much for waiting. I know it's nerve discussion, performing your poetry, and just being present here means the world to me and to everyone who's been involved at this event. And if you've signed up either on Eventbrite or signed in here, I'm going to be in touch with you to give you, to help you follow some of the artists that performed today, and to send you a link to the PowerPoint presentation based on this toolkit that you'll be able to use in your communities. And so we can all stay connected together and keep building this movement, keep building this conversation. The amount of powerful, intelligent women and humans in the room today is really overwhelming. And together we can build the city and build a movement that will actually meet our needs and be led by our voices. And we can define that movement for ourselves. So I just want to thank you again. I believe there's still more toolkits left if you want to take additional copies. And please speak to one another, build relationships, take the leftovers if there are any leftovers. And thank you very much. And may you all be